Thank you, everybody, for being here today for the pre-application and informational and technical web assistance webinar for the brain behavior quantification and synchronization, also known as BBQS, RFA. Today, we will have Lizzie Onkadovich from NIMH. She's a program officer at the NIMH that works with the NIH Brain Initiative. And she will be going over all of the details about this particular RFA. If we can all do our Zoom etiquette today, once the webinar is over, Lizzie will be taking questions. If you can raise your virtual hand and we will recognize and have you unmute and ask that particular question. Alternatively, if you would rather, you can put the questions into the chat and one of our moderators will read it off for you. And with that, I will move this on. Oh, and as well, this is being publicly, is recorded and will be posted publicly on the Brain Initiative website at a later date. So with that, I will let you take the stage, Lizzie.
Thank you, Dana. Really appreciate the introduction. Like Dana said, I'm Lizzie Onkadovich. I'm the program officer for this funding announcement. It's the Brain Initiative, Brain Behavior Quantification and Synchronization funding announcement, or BBQS. So just to get started with a little bit of background, we know that behavior is the primary output of the brain, and understanding its neural origins is key to advancing neuroscience, but it's also key to supporting brain health. And the focus of this RFA is really to study the brain in action. And this is in part motivated by the recent Brain Initiative reports that have called for more sophisticated methods of quantifying behavioral, environmental, and internal state influences on individuals. And it also calls for tools to analyze naturalistic or untrained and trained behaviors and to assimilate and link brain recordings with behavior. Understanding the full complexity of behavior requires detailed, multidimensional analysis of a broad range of behaviors in the context of the environment, and tools are needed to measure the full richness of complex behaviors and synchronize them to neural activity with high spatial and temporal resolution. BBQS is a multifaceted initiative. It has some overarching objectives. As you may have noticed from our logo graphic, which is actually in the top corner, it's very small, but it was also on our title page. BBQS seeks to advance research in both humans and in non-human organisms. Across species, BBQS seeks to advance development of tools for simultaneous multimodal measurement of behavior within complex dynamic physical and social environments, and align these data with simultaneously recorded neural activity. BBQS also seeks to develop novel conceptual and computational models that capture dynamic behavior-environment interactions across multiple timescales and integrate correlated neural activity into the model. Today, I want to orient you specifically to our BBQS funding announcement that hit the streets in July. This is RFA MH 22240, Brain Initiative, Brain Behavior Quantification and Synchronization, R61, R33 clinical trial optional. I want to highlight that this is a phased award with specific objectives to be achieved in each phase. I will talk about the specific goals and objectives of each phase a little later, but broadly speaking, the purpose here is to support development and validation of next generation tools, methods, and analytic approaches to precisely quantify behaviors and combine them with simultaneous recordings of direct neural activity in humans. Tools for measuring and analyzing behavior should be multimodal with the appropriate accuracy, specificity, temporal resolution, and flexibility necessary for integration with existing tools to measure and modulate brain circuits that give rise to those behaviors. This funding opportunity has specific areas of focus for the advancement of novel tools and approaches for brain behavior quantification and synchronization. Specifically, we're seeking to support tools that advance novel methods to capture and quantify multiple dimensions of behavior in real time, tools that advance environmental sensing or improve integration of contextual measures with measures of behavior. We seek to support novel applications or novel utilizations of existing smart technologies such as phones and wearables that can capture dynamic behavior and integrate behavior and physiological measures in the same time scale. And we also seek to develop less obtrusive and ambulatory recording devices that are wireless, that have longer term and have higher storage capacity and can achieve a higher temporal resolution or usage across timescales. We also seek to support reliable tools that can passively obtain objective measures that accurately reflect or predict subjective or internal mental states, and novel approaches that can integrate passive measures of behavior with subjective reports of individuals' internal states by using, for example, ecological momentary assessments or EMAs. We're also seeking to support novel approaches to integrate multimodal data modalities, multiple data modalities or data streams, and integration of peripheral and biophysiological measures with complex behaviors. We're also seeking to develop analytical tools and approaches that use, for example, machine learning and artificial intelligence methods that focus on behavioral quantification, and also novel conceptual and computational frameworks that incorporate integration and synchronization of multimodal data streams. I also want to orient you to the specific application instructions for this funding announcement. I'm going to try to go through these relatively briefly, as there are specific instructions in each of the sections of the research strategy, and you should pay close attention to these when you're preparing applications. I encourage you to refer back to the funding announcement for specific instructions for each of the sections. I'm just going to highlight some of the important considerations that are specific to this funding announcement. In terms of significance, applicants should describe how the project will advance technological, methodological, and computational approaches to characterize brain behavior relationships and integrate behavior, environmental sensing, and biophysiological measures. Applicants should also describe how the project will advance understanding of how the brain gives rise to human behavior, cognition, or changes in internal states. Applicants should also describe how the project will advance mechanistic understanding of brain behavior relationships. In terms of the investigators, applicants should describe how the combined expertise of the research team supports and advances the critical elements of the research, and how the combined teamed expertise is multidisciplinary, spanning behavioral science, computer and data science, ethics, and engineering. Applicants should also describe how the project incorporates novel approaches or advances existing approaches to quantifying behavior, cognition, and changes in internal states. Applicants should also describe the novel methods or approaches that are being used to integrate complex behaviors with neural data or biophysiological measures or information from the environment. And applicants should also describe any relevant computational or conceptual frameworks that are being used to integrate and synchronize these multimodal data streams. As I mentioned earlier, this is a phased award. There are specific goals and objectives relevant for each phase. The goal of the first phase, which is the R61, is to support novel tool development in the form of hardware or software that enables or facilitates capture of quantifiable complex behavioral data in real time for subsequent integration with brain data. For the R61, applicants should describe how proposed tools will enable and facilitate capture of quantifiable complex behavior in real time for subsequent integration with neural data. They should also describe how the new tools overcome current limitations. In the R33 phase, the goal is to integrate tools that have been developed in the R61 with approaches to measure human brain activity. Applicants should describe how the R33 phase integrates these novel tools with approaches to measure human neural activity. This FOA is clinical trial optional, and applicants also have the opportunity to incorporate a neuromodulation component in order to probe circuits that may underlie specific behaviors. Applications should note that any incorporation of a neuromodulatory intervention would constitute an NIH-defined clinical trial. This FOA only accepts mechanistic or BESH studies, that's basic experimental studies involving humans, that meet the NIH definition of a clinical trial, I've linked to all those definitions here for ease of reference. R33 applications that do include a clinical trial component should describe how the project advances the development of next generation closed loop systems through the incorporation of neurostimulation. Each application should clearly describe the pre-specified milestones that, if met, would justify proceeding on to the R33 phase. A milestone is defined as a scheduled event in the project timeline that signifies completion of a major project stage or activity. Criteria for success of proposed tools and methods should be clearly pre-specified in the milestones, and they should be defined in terms of the outcomes to be achieved rather than tasks to be completed in order to demonstrate initial validation of proposed tools and feasibility of their integration with neural recording. The milestones proposed must be objective, quantifiable, rigorously defined, feasible in terms of the study timeline and the approach, and scientifically justified. Satisfactory completion of the R61 milestones will be assessed administratively by program to determine eligibility to transition on to the R33 phase. It's possible that a project will not be recommended for transition to the R33 phase after administrative review, and that will depend on a variety of questions such as milestone completion, feasibility, and availability of funds. Applicants must also specify a timeline for the proposed work to be completed that is appropriate for the scope of the work that is planned in each phase. Teams will have 1 to 4 years to complete the R61 phase and up to 2 years for the R33 phase, but you should note that the total time across the phases cannot be more than 5 years. 5 years is the max. There are a few special considerations for this funding announcement. As invasive neural recording in humans and integration with other types of behavioral and environmental data raises specific neuroethical challenges related to responsible collection, storage, and use of these data, applicants must clearly describe how these considerations are being addressed in the application. And importantly, inclusion of a neuroethicist on the study team is a requirement of this funding announcement. Another special consideration is that there must be adequate quality assurance processes for data collection and annotation, and for open source or open sharing of developed resources. Plans for dissemination should be well developed. All of this should be described in the resource sharing plan, which is a requirement. I also want to point out that there are specific review criteria that special review criteria that are specific to this funding announcement across the sections of the research strategy. And again, I encourage applicants to pay close attention to this and refer back to the announcement frequently. Applicants will be reviewed on how the project contributes to the knowledge of human behavior, cognition, and changes in internal states, or brain behavior relationships. The R33 will be evaluated on how the work advances understanding of how the brain gives rise to human behavior, cognition, or changes in internal states, and how it advances our mechanistic understanding of brain behavior relationships. Teams of investigators will be evaluated on representation across relevant scientific fields with complementary expertise in neuroscience, behavioral science, computer and data science, and engineering. One thing I want to emphasize here is that the objectives of this FOA really necessitate strong team building efforts in order to incorporate the expertise and methodologies that are really required for this type of innovative tool and technology development. We strongly encourage teams with disparate backgrounds to group together in order to achieve the combined expertise that is necessary to propose highly responsive applications. In terms of innovation, reviewers will evaluate how the proposed project advances approaches to quantify behavior, cognition, and changes in internal states, how well the proposed project incorporates novel approaches to integrate complex behaviors with neural data and biophysiological measures and information from the environment, and the extent to which the proposed project advances computational and conceptual frameworks that integrate and synchronize neural and behavioral data and information from the environment. In terms of the environment, reviewers will evaluate how well suited the environment is to develop novel approaches and collecting and integrating simultaneous behavioral and neural measures in humans. Finally, the approach will be largely evaluated in terms of feasibility. In terms of the milestones, are they feasible and reasonable? To what extent is the study timeline feasible and can measure it with the scope of the work? In the R33, how viable is the plan to synchronize behavior, neural, and peripheral environmental measures? How appropriate are the neuroethical considerations of the proposed work? And to what extent are the elements of the resource sharing plan appropriate and well described? I wanted to dedicate a few slides to reviewing the PEDP. Another important consideration is that all Brain Initiative applications must include a plan for enhancing diverse perspectives, or PEDP. The PEDP encourages the research community to consider how diverse perspectives advance the specific aims and are integral to equity and inclusion in science. PEDPs are evaluated during both scientific and programmatic review. We have included the link with additional information here, and we have invited knowledgeable experts from the BRAIN team here to help field any questions that you may have on the PEDP. Special review criteria related to the PEDP will be evaluated throughout the research strategy. Specifically, the criteria relate to how the PEDP furthers and strengthens the significance, the investigator team, and the innovation of the approach. Applicants will be required to submit a timeline and milestones related to the PEDP, and those will be evaluated in terms of the approach. Timeline should be well developed and feasible. And also the features of the environment in the PEDP will be evaluated for how they will contribute to the success of the project. And this relates to collaborative arrangements, geographic diversity, as well as institutional support. Finally, I want to review the responsiveness criteria of applications that will specifically be not reviewed. So studies that will be deemed non-responsive prior to review are applications that are incomplete, that use only the R61 mechanism or only the R33 mechanism, applications that do not pre-specify objective criteria for success of proposed novel tools in the R61 milestones, applications that do not include a timeline for proposed work, studies involving tech development that do not involve human testing, studies only using non-human animals, studies in the R33 phase that do not propose simultaneous recording of brain and behavioral data, applications that do not both consider the potential ethical challenges of the proposed work and include an ethicist. The R33 clinical trial should be mechanistic, so proposals that aim to develop a therapeutic intervention for a specific indication or disorder, such as a traditional feasibility clinical trial or a pivotal clinical trial, would be not responsive. And any applications that do not include a PEDP would be not responsive. This slide is to remind you all of the dates for the 2023 and 2024 fiscal years. I've also included our contact information here. Excuse me. We have a dedicated inbox that our team manages, and we can address your questions there. Please do not hesitate to reach out prior to submission to ask any questions you may have. And this is the final slide that we prepared that provides resources, excuse me, and additional materials that you may want to reference to learn more about this funding opportunity and its development and evolution. Specifically, the concept clearances that are linked here speak to the BBQS objectives in each of these research domains. So in the human neuroscience and the organismal behavioral domains. And the BBQS workshop that took place this past spring includes videos, slides, and discussions amongst the various researchers and stakeholders in this space. And I encourage you to take a look at all of these materials. So that's the materials that we have prepared. I want to thank you for your attention, and my teammates and I are ready to address your questions related to this funding announcement. I'm going to have a sip of water first before we do that.
Terrific. And before we jump into questions, which we will do shortly, I really wanted to introduce the rest of the brain behavior quantification and synchronization team. In addition to Lizzie, we also have Holly Lisenby from NIMH, if you'll raise your hand. Perfect. Yvonne Bennett from NIMH. Ming Zhan from NIMH. Holly Moore from NIDA. Aaron King from NIMH. And Sandeep Kishore from the Office of the Director. And in addition, and since I see this question has already come through in the chat, we also have two members from the Brain Initiative Neuroethics team, Jay Churchill. If you don't mind, Jay, if you can raise your hand if you're able to, as well as Nina Shu. I did see them both on here. Great, thank you, Nina. And with that, I will go ahead and open up the discussion for questions. If you have questions, if you'll raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. I'll go ahead and do the first question I saw in the chat, which was about defining what we mean by a neuroethicist. Lizzie, do you want to take that? Or even better, if Nina, if you want to answer that, that would be fine as well.
I'm happy to let Nina take a crack at that one.
Sure, thanks, Lizzie. And I would also welcome Jay to chime in as well. So I think the description that I saw in the chat of a neuroethicist being somebody who explores ethical considerations as they specifically relate to research with the brain. So there may be ethical considerations that are, there's sort of the broader field of bioethics, but that we're defining neuroethicists as those who focus on those specific considerations that may arise uniquely because of research with the brain. Jay, anything you want to add? If not, does that help to clarify?
Yes. That helps. Thank you so much, Nina. And additionally, this particular individual had mentioned that they did not have this expertise in their own institution, but we would definitely encourage collaborations across institutions. And actually, I think that is really going to be necessary for this type of work. And I do believe Nina and Jay do have resources of neuroethicists out there as well. The next question was about a person saying that they can imagine that many scientific questions along the lines of this FOA will be somewhat exploratory in nature, given that we will be creating relatively new technologies and experimental paradigms. Will reviewers be given any guidance on the FOA's openness to exploratory and observational rather than purely hypothesis-driven studies?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to kind of focus on is the fact that this is milestone driven, right? So there are specific objectives for each of the phases. And you know, in terms of the specific aims for each of these projects, I think they should really be well tailored to really demonstrating the ability to reach those milestones. And incorporate what those kind of pre-specified objective milestones are for that specific project. It's really true that we weren't very prescriptive in the types of tools that we asked for, because we think we want this to be investigator driven. We think people can come up with some really cool tools. And so I would say that there is kind of room to be exploratory and creative, but you really do have to make sure that what you're proposing is feasible in terms of demonstrating those milestones. And I welcome anyone else from the team to kind of contribute as well if they have more feedback.
If there's no other feedback, I'll move to the next question, which was from Jean DeBarros. I don't see what the question is, but I see you do have one. So if you can unmute and ask your question, that would be terrific.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you for offering me the chance to ask my question. Just quickly, I am developing the next generation of advanced neuromodulation closed-loop device, which will offer real-time neural activity measurements synchronized with simultaneous brain stimulation to modulate internal brain states in order to precisely quantify behaviors and alleviate symptoms of targeted neurological disorders. And I feel that my project actually meets most of the requirements of this call. But there is a trick, and my question is, I work in the UK. Is this call allow a researcher working from the UK to participate either as leading a project or taking part in a project that is led by a US team?
Yeah, so foreign components are allowed under this funding opportunity. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It does, but could you be a bit more specific? Can I lead the project? Can I myself actually be the principal investigator of the project and therefore being the one that is making the application? Or should I join a team in the US that is leading the project, but where I come as a complementary part of the team?
I can't speak to who should be on your team per se, but we encourage collaborations, but I don't think that Rebecca is raising her hand. She can answer the question with respect to whether or not you could be the lead PI on this.
Exactly.
I'm just looking at the RFA itself, and it does indicate that non-domestic, so non-US foreign institutions are eligible to apply as the applicant institution.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Which means that I can be the one leading the project.
Thanks for being a little clearer than me, Rebecca.
Would you mind put you on the chat, the document in question, because I read through, I couldn't find that information myself. I would much appreciate it if you put a link in the chat so that I can save it and go and read through it more carefully.
Erin, would you mind linking?
Terrific. The next question is asking about a clarification on whether brain activity can include non-invasive recordings or whether it must be intracortical recordings of some type. This
is a great question. So the RFA actually specifically says that we encourage the use of concomitant, non-invasive and invasive modalities and approaches. But if we kind of think about expectations in terms of the level of temporal resolution and spatial specificity that we were really looking for in order to kind of sync up brain and behavior, we do think that an invasive component is optimal in order to get that level of resolution and that level of precision. So we encourage people to incorporate a invasive component, but we do kind of welcome multimodal approaches as well. And I'm happy to let others from the team kind of speak to these objectives as well.
Does anybody else have thoughts from the team? Okay, well then we'll move to the next one, and I wholeheartedly agree with Lizzie. The next question is, what sort of behavior are we interested in measuring? Does it have to be naturalistic, for example, in the environment, or can it be in the lab? Psychiatric behavior, such as depression?
Yeah, it can be those things. Sarah, Holly, you can go ahead and answer this one.
Right. So we are interested in multiple streams of behavior and context, behavior in response to environment, and quantifying the behaviors of the individual and the environmental features that the individual is responding to. That could be in the laboratory, but we're really interested in moving beyond what our current technology can do, because this is about developing tools to study brain origins of behaviors that we can't currently study. If we can currently study it, it would not be responsive. We're really trying to develop tools, devices, algorithms, software, sensors that are able to extend our ability to pull together brain and behavior. And part of that extension is naturalistic settings. Part of why we're interested in naturalistic settings is that's where a lot of behavioral disorders occur, whether it's substance abuse or psychiatric illness or other behaviors that occur too infrequently to be able to be captured in the laboratory. So that gives you some sense of what we're trying to prioritize in terms of behavior capture.
Great. I see that your hand is raised, Mark Cohen. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. By the way, it's good to see my friends at NIH online again. Our proposal is focused on working with people who are not medical and not clinical individuals, but in the context of classroom and learning and attention. Therefore, it is very unlikely that we would want to be looking at something that would be classified as an invasive recording. And I want to be sure that this is something that would be considered responsive to this application based on the question that I heard from one of your audience members.
Lizzie, do you want to take that or?
Yeah, so, looking at the RFA, it doesn't require invasive recording specifically, but we actually think that in terms of kind of responsiveness, there are degrees of responsiveness. And in order to be maximally responsive to the types of tools and the precision measurements that we're really interested in here, and in order to understand how specific circuits are giving rise to behavior, we think that invasive neural recording affords that as a modality that other existing modalities just don't afford. So I would encourage you to kind of consider ways to incorporate that. It doesn't necessarily mean that tools need to be developed specifically to be paired with invasive neural recording, right? It could be tools that can be used more ubiquitously, but could be validated using individuals who have opportunities to record directly. Happy to.
Yeah,
Can I follow up on that just a bit? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Lizzie, this might be a good segue to address Chris Roselle's follow-up chat. More specifically, would a project with only non-invasive recording, for example, EEG, be considered non-responsive?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say. I mean, again, it's not part of the non-responsiveness criteria, right? That wasn't one of the bulleted parts, the bulleted list. But I think, again, there are degrees of responsiveness. I'm not sure that EEG, even though temporally it's better than some other kind of neuroimaging modalities, it's not great for spatial specificity and understanding specific circuits. So, Rebecca, do you want to contribute here?
Yeah, I just want to follow up a little bit on what the definition of responsiveness is with regard to sort of the administrative aspects of these applications. So the criteria listed in the FOA about which applications are non-responsive to this FOA are very specific about which ones will not proceed to peer review. So those applications that are non-responsive as defined by those criteria will not proceed to peer review. I'm a scientific review officer at the National Institute of Mental Health and involved in many of the Brain Initiative review meetings. And so I can tell you that, of course, our reviewers will be fully informed about what the goals of the FOA are and what the specific review criteria are for this FOA when they're evaluating the applications that do proceed to peer review. And of course, they will be addressing in their evaluations how well the applications address those goals of the FOA as defined in the review criteria. So it's a little bit, there's two sort of parts to this answer. The non-responsiveness really defines which will proceed to peer review. And then there's how well does an application address the goals as defined by the specific review criteria, which the reviewers would be asked to evaluate. And
Thanks,
hopefully that
Rebecca.
helps.
That's really, really clear. Thank you.
And I just wanted to follow up on, agree with everything that Rebecca just said, and we'll point out that for an application to be scientifically competitive, peer reviewers will be looking for innovation in terms of the tool development, because the focus here is really on tool development to extend our ability to have high resolution spatial and temporal capture brain activities synchronized with multiple streams of behavior. So Rebecca's right. It might be minimally responsive, but not scientifically competitive if you were only using something like currently existing EEG by itself.
And Yvonne, did you have something to say? I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, just to build on what already has been said by Holly and others, with regard to the sensor development, we are really reaching broadly ourselves, reaching out to the community, and hope that when you build your team to include, engineers who are building novel sensors. We're looking at IEEE, take a look at IEEE and see the types of technologies that are, currently being built, and think about, incorporating this high spatial and temporal resolution when you can.
Mark,
does that have your question answered? Almost.
I mean, it's clear from the tenor of what I'm hearing from NIH that you are really looking for a set of applications which has high spatial resolution and the presumably highly invasive recordings. On the other hand, from a review perspective, it did not really appear to be that case when we looked at the FOA. And I'm wondering, does this mean that the study section is going to have to follow the guidance as specifically in the FOA, or they're going to be given different guidance? And if it is the former, does that mean at the program level that the set of priorities may differ somewhat from we see in the written document?
So I can address that. The reviewers, so of course, the reviewers must follow the same guidance that the applicants follow. And so therefore, the review is bound by what is written in the RFA.
Okay, great. The next question was if there is somewhere where that you can find specific examples of specific AIM pages for these milestone-driven funding opportunities, especially for the R61, R33 mechanism. I am not sure where to find those, but one of my colleagues might. Do you know if there are any types of examples or guidelines?
So I did put in the chat the link to ERA Reporter. There's also on the NIH Brain Initiative website, you can search all funded grants and look at the abstracts of funded grants. Mechanism that would be similar to this would be the UH3, UG3, which is also a milestone gated type of funding mechanism. We don't have examples of funded grants from this FOA yet because it was just announced. So this will be the first round. And I will also say that the program staff are more than happy to look at your draft aims and to propose milestones and give you specific feedback on your specific projects. So that's probably the best way, is to get tailored feedback on exactly what your proposal is.
And that's great advice, Holly. That is actually one of the #1 things, is always reach out to your program officer, or to Lizzie in this case, or any of us on the BBQS team. Holly Moore, I saw you had your hand raised. Did you still have something to say?
Yeah, I had said basically what the other Holly said, and just to clarify too, as program officers, we wouldn't be allowed to share aspects of others' grants with you. So it's best to use Reporter and make some connections yourself with people who you think you might want to connect with. But the first rule is, yeah, interact with us as program officers early and often. We're like call centers. We're just waiting for your call.
Great, thank you, Holly Moore and Holly Lisenby. The next question was, does the technology development phase favor a particular phase? For example, hardware, software, synchronization?
No, I mean, we're really interested in all these things. Again, we're really conscientious about being prescriptive in the types of tools that people could propose. So any of the tools that really speak to any of the focus areas, and we tried to keep it interestingly broad in terms of how to integrate behavior, how to synchronize behavior, would be welcome. Really the key part is that it require the based off of the two separate phases and the milestones, it really requires you to take whatever you develop in the R61 phase and synchronize it with neural activity in the R33 phase. So that synchronization aspect is key and important. Whereas, you know, the types of behaviors, the naturalistic setting versus the laboratory setting, all of those are various parameters that can be explored.
Right. Thank you, Lizzie. And I mean, the idea is that we're trying to move towards more or towards a naturalistic behavior, to these very unobtrusive type of measurements. So, but we understand there are steps in the process. Yuri, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Is there a way to combine the two phases into one? Because basically, I will tell you our project, and it seemed to me that it's really combining the two already. We have an echo recording of natural conversation. So we find a way in which we can record the ECOG patient for the entire week in the room with cameras and microphones. And therefore, we can collect speech, free conversations, really big data. We're talking about around like 1 million words per patient and 20 to 40 hours of data per patient. We want to scale to 50 patients. But that means that basically we already have the technology to record the behavior that we are interested in natural setup and the neural data. So in a way, it's really, for us, it will mean more to so that we can do it at scale, then to develop sensors first and go to the recording next.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, you know, I could kind of say about that just based off of what you said. I mean, sensor technology is big, right? Figuring out that how to incorporate different sorts of environmental data is, you know, one of the focus areas. But another of the focus areas is figuring out how best to integrate these types of data streams, right? We're also looking for conceptual and computational frameworks to make sense of these data in a way that's meaningful. That's, I think, the last bullet point for the focus areas. So there's a lot of ways we can think about how to put these types of data, these multimodal data streams together to make sense of them.
Yeah, so definitely that's the case, because we're using a lot of deep learning and deep language models because it's such a big data in a naturalistic setup. That's the way to handle it. My only point is that basically they're so interleaved that it's like two stages of first do deep learning and then collect the data. Doesn't fit this scheme of basically we're doing it together from the get-go. And we're already actually doing it. So we already have a pilot because we need preliminary results. So we already started collecting these preliminary results and we're analyzing it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So just to be clear, you can do human testing in the R61.
Okay, you can. Thanks. Okay. So that's all. Thanks.
But you must do it in the R33, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thanks.
Great, thank you. There's another question that this person is still unclear of exactly what we're looking for in the RFA. Invasive recordings in humans, which can capture brain signals in naturalistic settings outside of the labs, are limited to probably RNS devices. I'm not sure what other technology you would consider in this RFA. I see that Holly Lisenby also answered this in the chat, but Lizzie, go ahead and give this an answer as well.
Okay, I was just reading Holly's answer, but so I don't want to duplicate it. You know, there are different stages of tool development. And for validation stages, it's possible to use other types of patient populations or other types of settings where you can capture intracranial recordings. So those aren't necessarily, it's not exclusive to people who have these RNS types devices, although yes, there are people who are in the world with those devices, and those would be candidates as well. We're not telling you definitely which type of intracranial recording you would need to incorporate. There are various ways you can incorporate intracranial recording in order to validate novel behavioral tools and ensure that behavior and environmental sensing and biophysiological measures are integrated with those neural recordings. So I'm not sure if that overlaps with what Holly said. Holly, you can feel free to fill in if you had different ideas as well.
Right. So we're not promoting any particular company's products, but I do encourage you to think about partnership with industries that can help to supply research tools that would meet the goals of this RFA. And there's more than one out there. And this RFA will support tool development. And that does mean supporting engineering projects that develop new devices and new implants and new electrodes that can capture neuronal data at high temporal spatial resolution on an ambulatory basis. Part of what motivates this RFA is that there are limited tools. We want to see more tools and make them more available and make them more flexible to study types of behaviors that we can't currently study.
And related to this question, there was another question that was asking if they could use a device developed in the UK to conduct a small-scale clinical validation study. Who to contact in the US as a potential foreign applicant?
I think I need a little bit more contextual information about the clinical aspect. I'm not sure if you mean like a therapeutic clinical trial for a novel device.
Yes, I can make it more accurate. Yes, effectively. The idea is once we develop the device in the UK, then is to take it to the US and do a small-scale clinical validation where we test the device in, let's say, 10-ish patients with specific targeted type of disease like epilepsy or Parkinson's disease or so forth, and then show that effectively the device that we've developed is able to deliver what we say is capable of delivering, both in terms of recording of internal states, as well as modulating, because the device that I'm developing is a invasive approach, as well as being able to modulate internal status. The question is about more here, I would say, the legal aspect of it. The device is being developed in the UK, and we take in the US. What does happen? Should I go for FDA approval or something like that style? Or would it be in somewhat under the umbrella of this call in somewhat a way to conduct this small scale study on that umbrella?
So it sounds to me like you're talking about kind of early feasibility testing and gathering early evidence of clinical efficacy in a patient population, which would actually be out of scope of this RFA if you're trying to figure out if a novel device for epilepsy is effective for epilepsy.
No, not really, actually, not to demonstrate the efficacy of the device in the disease, but to show that the device, for instance, is capable for recording simultaneously behaviors, neural signals, and at the same time stimulating. Because when you develop a device, we want to show that effective is working in a way that is doing what it's supposed to do.
So this would be people who already have the device and you're trying to validate the various measures of interest.
Well, the device we develop it is the external device. It's not something that the people actually will have with them per se. We will come and connect to them. They will have wires going out from their brain. We come and connect our device to it and show that our device is capable of recording the signals in question.
Okay, I think it really just depends on the objectives here, and I'm not sure I'm really understanding it clearly, but you know, I encourage you to reach out to people who could be interested in collaborations in this space, but you know, of course, we can't really match make here for you, but we hope to that this could be an opportunity for people to network a little bit.
Okay,
Right.
maybe just the second one quickly, which was in NEAHH, who should I contact? Is there a specific person is dealing with foreign applications, or foreign applications is managed in the same way as a local applicant?
The same contact information at the bottom of the funding announcement is, you know, for anyone who's interested in applying.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I definitely, if you have specific questions about your application, I would definitely reach out to ask those. The next question was about, excuse me, I'm trying to get back up here. Things just moved on me. It was from Corey Inman, and he had asked about the budget limits, which I do see that Holly Lisenby did answer, but if you want to just briefly mention it, Holly, that would be great.
Yeah, I kind of pasted this directly from the RFA, which gives you an idea of what we intend to commit as an estimate. So you can see their estimated total of 10 million to fund 8 to 10 awards in FY24. And again, another estimated 10 million to fund 8 to 10 awards in FY25.
So just to clear, I'm not entirely clear. I understand that there's a commitment of in those years, but I don't understand, is that like if we apply for FY24 or 23 or FY24, if we apply for FY24, does that mean that it's $10 million distributed across 10 teams for the entire 5-year project, that commitment has been made? Or is it that, because that would be like something like if there were 10 teams, that'd be basically applying for $200,000 a year in order for that to be possible. So I'm just not really, I'm not sure on the time range here. That's not clear to me. I don't quite understand, because it also seems like it could be if you could apply for up to $1 million per year for the project, but I'm uncertain on where does the real limit lie in that range.
Aren't those numbers in the RFA that I put in the chat per year? Maybe you can clarify.
So it doesn't include the out years, right? So and so I struggled to convey this via email as well.
Yeah,
There's no budget cap for this, but your budget needs to be commensurate with the work and the requirements, the needs of the team. So
yeah. I guess what I'm trying to protect against is the risk that I propose a project that is too big. I think that that's my primary concern, that I do have I feel like I do have a scientifically justified project that would be very big, and it could be, somewhere in the 500 to $1 million, per year, just for the purely the number of collaborators that I'm trying to put together. But I'm concerned that would be, kind of administratively putting myself in a position to not get, or putting the project at in a worse position. And so I'm trying to understand.
So Lizzie, I think people may not understand what out years mean. Just let me restate that. Are you saying that we're intending to commit an estimated of 10 million for the first year of 8 to 10 awards?
Yes.
So that would mean that the first year of 8 to 10 awards would sum up to approximately 10 million. So each award might be 1 million or less or more, depending on what the scientific requirements are. We've been talking about human intracranial recording. We understand this requires neurosurgery, and we understand that there are substantial costs for these types of projects.
Thank you. That helps me a lot.
Terrific. The next was kind of a question / statement, but I think it's worth reading out here. And it was so to clarify, the RFA is asking for novel tools for behavioral measurement that can integrate with neural measurements, not for novel tools of neural measurement. It sounds like a lot of confusion is thinking that it is the latter. I'll go ahead and let one of you guys take it. I know you had said something about this, Holly Lisenby. I don't know if you wanted to repeat.
Yeah, well, let's be sure that Lizzie shares the same view. I replied that we're open to novel tools on both the brain side and the behavior side, and also at the connection between the two. But Lizzie, maybe you'd like to comment.
Yeah, so one of the focus areas specifically talks about less obtrusive ambulatory devices that are wireless. And I think in that domain, we're talking about devices that enable recording and also synchronization with eye tracking and location position recording and other types of multimodal data. So it does include hardware development that facilitates ambulatory neural recording in humans. But it's not just that. It could be other types of hardware development. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Much of this focuses on behavioral capture because we think that's where the biggest gap area is. But there's other limitations in the current technologies we have to record from humans and integrate behavior with neural recordings. So all of those are kind of on the table. Most of the focus areas talk about multimodal integration of behavioral, biophysiological, and environmental data together. But there are other focus areas that do focus more on hardware development to actually facilitate the neural recording aspect.
And what I'll add to that is that with the BRAIN initiative, we've had a lot of tool building, a lot of the neural recording tool building that has been going on since the beginning or the inception of the BRAIN initiative. And this is really the first RFA that is focusing on behavior and behavior capture. So yes, the emphasis is on the behavior, but as Lizzie and Holly Lisenby also mentioned, we understand there are other things that also need to work in order to make the behavioral capture as rich as we want it. So we aren't excluding these neural technologies either.
Yeah, I agree with your comment, Dana. Absolutely. And part of the rationale is we currently have great temporal and spatial resolution with our invasive neural recording. We lack as fine-grained temporal resolution for behavior capture and for environment capture. So the innovation there on the behavior side is give us more temporal resolution, give us the naturalistic behaviors, measure environment. Innovation on the brain side is take this great spatial temporal resolution and let people take it home with them, make it ambulatory, make it more flexible in terms of the types of environments where you can do those measurements.
And we'll take one last question. I see that Kareem, your hand is up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is really specific to studies with RNS-like device, where initially the human subjects are enrolled for a particular period. and then eventually they have the option to opt out of the study. Will the RFA support retention efforts beyond the initial period that the patients have consented to? For example, to continue to test the technology in the R61 phase while following up with the patients?
I think this is kind of an area of open consideration. I think you're kind of speaking a little bit to post-trial responsibilities a little bit. Am I reading this right? Or are you talking more about incorporating a more longitudinal aspect?
Yeah, so these patients typically consent for, let's say, 2 years to being followed up on an existing project, but then they can opt out at any time after that. So let's say we come back and tell them, hey, we're not, adding to the therapy, or we're not testing any new form of therapy, but you just have the device and we're just interested to test this technology at home, for example, to monitor, relationship between motor activity and neural activity. And they consent to that. So the goal is not really to test therapy, but rather to make good use of these human subjects, if they consent, to be able to get the necessary data in the later phase of the program.
Yeah, I mean, you can use patient populations who already have these devices in order to conduct some additional testing in terms of the focus areas for BBQS.
Thank you.
Great. I want to thank everybody for being on the call today and to making this such an active discussion. I hope we were able to answer your questions. If you still have lingering questions, please reach out to us. I put the email in the chat for the BBQS team, and someone will get back to you with those answers. This will also be has been recorded and will be housed on the Brain Initiative website, so you can refer back to that as well. And thank you again. And thank you very much for Lizzie for the great presentation, and team for all of the answers.
I just want to say that a lot of people seem to have very specific questions related to their specific projects, and I'd be happy to meet with you one-on-one to really discuss the details. And please reach out via email. I help manage the BBQS email, or you can reach out to me directly. Happy to talk about it.